the stress molecule that you've never heard of, but your body makes daily. You're not anxious because you're broken. You're anxious because your brakes don't work.
Why your anti-anxiety pill and your brain's calming system are not the same.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Don't Look Up, where we encourage you to look up. I'm here today with Dr. Scott Sherr.
Good to see you, Maria.
Yeah, we're here in Boulder, your hometown. Today, we're going to be talking about something that our company basically specializes in, and that's GABA, or gamma-aminobutyric acid. I want to go into a little bit of the problems with GABA. And, maybe as a society, if we break it down in neurotransmitters, we're almost over-glutamated. I'm not sure if that's technically
I think we just made the word, but I like it.
Yeah, you can trademark it.
Yeah.
We're so active all the time. And our bodies, at least evolutionarily, are not really used to this level of activity. So perhaps we're going to dive into really that problem around not having enough GABA in our system or not producing enough. So should we get into it?
Let's do it. I mean, you mentioned earlier the brakes. The brakes of our brain is the GABA system. And GABA is our primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. So we have our excitatory neurotransmitter. The most prominent one we have is glutamate, as you mentioned. And glutamate toxicity is rampant. And so this overglutamated, as you mentioned, is actually also called glutamate toxicity. The most common example of this acutely is you go to a Chinese restaurant and you have monosodium glutamate as an additive to make the food sweet.
So I can't have General Tso's chicken.
You can, but maybe you can't. It depends on the person.
Some people probably shouldn't have it because of the calorie content.
Well, there's that. It's also fried and all that good stuff. But the deal here is that if you have a big bolus or a lot of MSG, your body has a ton of glutamate and it has to convert that over to GABA. So the cool thing about, and really interesting, is that our primary excitatory neurotransmitter, glutamate, and our primary inhibitory neurotransmitter are actually in the same axis. So you make GABA from glutamate. And so these cofactors, magnesium and B6, to be able to do that conversion. So if you're not that great at converting, you're going to have a hard time if you get a big glutamate bolus or a huge amount of it all at the same time. And that's what happens with MSG. But the problem is that most of us are living in a world, in our own worlds, of GABA deficiency. So we don't have enough GABA around because of stress, because of toxins in our environment, because of inflammation, and many other things. Magnesium and B6 deficiency, and maybe you can't convert over from that glutamate to the GABA. And so what happens then is that you have this sort of GABA deficit, and that can really manifest in a lot of different ways, but anxiety, depression, insomnia, a mind that just won't stop going. These are things that happen when we have less GABA around.
Now, one of the ways that people deal with this artificially is benzodiazepines.
Yeah.
I read a statistic that something like 6% of America is on a benzo. I feel like it might be more than
It's actually it was actually much higher during the pandemic. It was actually the number one increase in prescription during the pandemic was benzodiazepines, was benzos. And the reason why is that benzos, what they do is they bind very tightly to that GABA receptor. When it happens, they bind to a separate site to where GABA would bind. And what they do is they enhance the affinity for GABA to bind there.
And this is what's called a positive allosteric modulator.
Yeah, PAM for short. Yes. So positive allosteric modulators are things that bind to the GABA receptor, but a separate site than when GABA would bind. As a result of that, it increases the affinity of GABA to bind. And the problem with benzos is that they bind so quickly and so tightly to that GABA receptor so that all this GABA binds and then you deplete GABA very, very quickly. And so you feel good for a little while because that GABA system is being hyperstimulated and overactivated to give you some GABA. But the problem is that you get more GABA deficiency over time. And what your body does is it decreases the number of receptors available in process of being flooded with GABA because of that affinity increase. And so you get this sort of weird, unfortunate cycle where you need more and more benzos to get the same effect. And that's called tolerance. And if you stop taking the benzos, you can withdraw. And you also can die from a benzo withdrawal.
Yeah, you can't just cold turkey stop taking a benzo.
And alcohol is the same thing. So people, medicate themselves with alcohol for the same reasons they would take anti-anxiety medicine. This is working on that GABA receptor. Again, as a positive modulator, alcohol does the same thing. But again, what happens with alcohol is it binds very tightly and then it unbinds very quickly afterwards. And this is why when I was a kid and I was over 21, but drinking alcohol, I was probably under 21, let's be honest. I would wake up 2 or 3 hours later after drinking that night and be awake and have a terrible headache. And that's classic sign of glutamate toxicity because you have all this GABA that's been depleted so that glutamate level is higher as a result, and you have this imbalance, right? And so if you have this imbalance, you're going to get headaches, you're going to get tremors, you're going to get anxiety, all the things that we mentioned before. So it feels right for people to get an instant fix. And I get that. But long-term, alcohol we know is not good for you, especially in high amounts. There's even an argument about any alcohol now. Yeah. And then, of course, benzos can be very helpful for somebody in the short term. But the problem is that, tolerance, withdrawal, and dependence that can happen.
Let's go into some of those modern lifestyle factors that contribute to this. We've already touched on some of them.
Sure.
But for example, some people work 8 hours a day very rarely anymore. But let's say you have 8 to 12 hour days, you take the work home. There's a lot of just sort of rampant stress there.
Yeah.
Work's certainly a contributory factor. You also have people that have toxic partners.
Toxic relationships.
Toxic
bed partners if they snore in the bed too, right?
Yeah, this is this is one of those arguments for sleep divorce. Or
yes, sleep union, I think is they're calling it.
Sleep unions.
I think it's a positive spin on sleep divorce.
Oh, man.
But it's actually a crazy statistic, like around 50% of U.S. couples do not sleep in the same bed.
Okay, yeah. That's new news to me.
Yeah.
All right. So that's interesting. Maybe they should just get cooling mattress and a CPAP machine.
Well, the alternative is a word of a thought for everybody is that you can actually just get 2 bed sheets for the bed. That actually works pretty well too. So if you have like separate bed sheets, so you're not but if your partner snores, you need to get out of the room.
So in Europe, they have like 2 separate mattresses and you put them together. Okay, so modern day life, we've talked about relationships, environmental toxicities.
Sure.
That's certainly one. If you live in a city, there's kind of overstimulation.
For sure.
Light, I imagine, is a huge factor.
That's a big one.
And so just light regulation, good tips for people?
Yeah, I mean, you can also talk about this too, given your experience. But I think with light, we should try to match the normal rhythms of the sunlight, when it's up near you. And trying to get sunlight in the morning when the sun rises and watch the sun set. And trying to, with all of our computer screens, try to protect our eyes during the day and not be under studio lights when you're recording too often. Because after today, you and I will both have a headache.
So. Yeah, so it's interesting. You're wearing the Biohacker shirt, which is from our nonprofit, Health Optimization Medicine and Practice. And so one of the things that we always have in health optimization medicine is that evolutionary perspective.
Yep.
And we think about it evolutionarily, like our bodies, our cells have developed over, centuries, thousands of years.
Millions of years, really.
Millions of years. Yeah. Only recently that electricity came on board, right? So Edison was the 1800s?
Yes.
And so electricity comes on board in 1800s. And if you think about it from an evolutionary time scale, that's been maybe 200 years. And you're saying to your bodies, okay, 200 years of all of this new technology, and the technology is only becoming more rampant, right? And all of a sudden now we're able to have a phone in bed. We're able to, watch Netflix and have a TV in our bedrooms. That stuff didn't exist 200 years ago. And so now we have all this overstimulation. And if you just think about it from first principles, it takes a while for evolution to make that jump.
Right. That's why we're no longer going to be humans. We're going to be AI bots with super powers.
I'm waiting for my Neuralink.
Yeah, I'm not waiting for mine. But I think what it comes down to, Boomer, with the stress aspect of things is that we're constantly in fight or flight. You're constantly in that stress, sympathetic nervous system activation. And what happens when you're in that is that you deplete your GABA system. You overactivate certain aspects of your mitochondria, your cells, and trying to make more energy. And the whole process gets deficient and dysfunctional over time. And what happens is that those breaks go away. And if you don't have breaks, your mind is not going to stop going, because our minds are ridiculous, as we all know, the kinds of thoughts that we can have.
How many thoughts do we have a day?
On average, we have about 70,000 on a regular day. But if you're anxious or stressed or depressed even, you're going to have on average about 120,000.
Wow.
So people don't think if you're depressed, you have more thoughts, but you actually just have the same thoughts over and over and over again. It's called rumination. Anxiety is the same thing. What we say, anxiety is you're worried about the future. Depression, you're worried about the past, right? Or thinking about the past or whatever. The GABA system is what's called an interneuron. So it kind of belongs and stays between other neurons. Like, about the superstar neurons, everybody knows, like dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin. These are like your superstar neurotransmitters, as opposed to GABA, which is like this unsung hero, which is actually modulating and regulating a lot of the flow. So we have tons of sensory information coming in at any moment, any time. Any room you're in right now, if you're listening, you could just look around. Are you processing all that information? No, because you actually have these gates on what's coming in, and your GABA system is really involved in almost all of that.
Let's dive a little bit into GABA. And you've already talked a little bit about how this acts in the brain. And GABA is actually made from glutamate. It goes through a conversion process, glutamic acid decarboxylase, vitamin B6 and magnesium as potential deficiencies that need to be corrected in order to convert GABA. Let's get into other ways that we can naturally improve GABA. Talk about, first lifestyle changes.
Yeah, I mean, that's the first thing you want to talk about with patients, or at least what I do in clinical practice. And the key with that is stress mitigation, as we've been talking about. So what are they doing in their life that's preventing them from having that down regulation of the nervous system? And that could be just taking more breaks during the day. Sleep is a big one, right? If you're not getting enough sleep at night, I think the average adult in the United States gets less than 6.5 hours of sleep a night. So most of us need much more than that. If you think you're part of the exception to the rule, you likely aren't. It's about 5%, I think.
There's a gene, right? It's DEC2, or I can't remember exactly which one it is, but it's less than 2% of the population.
Yeah. So I know my father has this gene because he's been doing it all his life and he's perfectly functional, but very few, I didn't get that one, unfortunately. So I need to get my 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night. So sleep is a big one, right? If you can really regulate your sleep better, you're going to have less stress as the day goes on, no doubt about it. And then from the stress mitigation aspect of things, you can also think about meditation, breath work, yoga, even exercise can be helpful here. Exercise releases something called BDNF, which is a brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which actually enhances the GABA system. So you also think about stressful parts of your evolution. So if you're going through menopause, for example, if your hormones are changing significantly as a female, your GABA system is going to be completely dysregulated too, because you're losing progesterone, which is the main hormone that women make that helps them regulate their sleep cycle, actually. And if you have less progesterone around, you're not going to sleep as well. So you have to think about kind of where are you in your life cycle. We talk about that health equals A plus B plus C in health optimization medicine, right? So it's the absence of disease versus B is the balance between anabolism and catabolism, which is breakdown and also growth of the system. And then the third one is C is the life cycle of the organism. So you have to kind of know where you are in that process.
Yeah. One of the things that I've always found in working with clients is that you have a period where, they want to work on the lifestyle factors, but they need to see success now.
Yeah.
And so what are the tools that we can use to show people success now? Things like vagal nerve training, but also supplements wise.
Yeah. One thing that I always like to think about almost initially is that the precursor for glutamate in the body is glutamine, which is another amino acid. So you can take glutamate directly like MSG, but you can also, this amino acid glutamine, it gets converted into glutamate in the body, and then glutamate gets converted into GABA. So if you're glutamine deficient, because of many different reasons, but the number one reason actually is a leaky gut. So if you have a gut that's, your GI system is leaky, meaning that your small intestine is allowing things into the body that shouldn't get there, the whole system is going to be more inflamed. And as a result of that, the glutamine that you take in your diet is going to mostly try to go to the small intestine to try to heal it. And it's not enough as a precursor to get glutamate into the brain and then also GABA. So interesting because, GABA itself is too big of a molecule to get into the brain. So if you take GABA as a supplement and it works for you, it's likely because you have a leaky gut, which is corresponding to a leaky brain. It sounds scary, but it is very common, especially if you had a chronic infection, if you have chronic stress, if you have chronic inflammation, this is all going to affect that gut lining. So I have an interesting story here because I had somebody that connected with me. He's like, well, he had a leaky gut. He started taking glutamine and he started feeling so much better. But he had been taking GABA supplements at the same time. The GABA supplements have been working for him. He started taking glutamine, so he healed up his leaky gut, and all of a sudden the GABA supplements weren't working anymore. And that's because he had sealed up his gut and he sealed up his brain at the same time. So glutamine is one of the main levers that I think about, but you have to be careful with glutamine because it can also be activating. If you don't have a leaky gut and you take too much glutamine, you're going to get too much glutamate and then you're going to feel maybe like shit too.
Over glutamated, you take more. It's just...
Yeah, so you have to be careful. But it could be a really interesting lever for people that have a leaky gut and leaky brain, because if you seal up those barriers, you're going to feel so much better regardless, because inflammation in the system is going to go down dramatically. So, and then there's other things that can actually modulate the GABA receptor itself, which you and I know very well. You want to talk about any of them that you like?
I mean, look, when we start talking about supplements, things that come up commonly are L-theanine, Muscimol is one that, or Agarin is one that we like to talk about a lot. Let's go into both of those, actually.
Yeah, I think L-theanine is an interesting one. So L-theanine, most people think about it from green tea. It's enhancing the GABA system, and it's doing that in a very natural way. It's a positive allosteric modulator, that GABA receptor. So it helps increase the affinity for GABA to bind, but it's not like a benzo or an alcohol where it binds so tightly. So L-theanine binds, but it happily binds and relaxing binding and then relaxing off the binding. So you get some GABA release, but nothing too crazy. What's interesting about L-theanine, though, is if you take too much of it, some people can actually have a paradoxical effect. So you have to be careful how much you take.
So when we're talking about paradoxical effect, what are some of the reactions that people have?
So instead of feeling relaxed, they actually feel anxious.
Yeah.
It has this reverse effect on one of the enzymes and actually can make you increase your glutamate levels. Yeah, interestingly enough, yeah, you have to be careful there. But agrin's also very interesting, right? So this kind of falls into a different category. Agrin is something that binds directly to the GABA receptor where GABA would bind. So it's called an orthosteric ligand of the GABA receptor. And so what happens is it acts just like GABA. And then from there, it binds directly to the GABA receptor, working just like GABA. And so the cool way of doing this is that you bind something like agrin along with something that increases the affinity for GABA to bind. In this case, if you have agrin around, you don't have to worry about being GABA deficient because it's supporting the whole system. The problem is if you just use alcohol or even any other positive allosteric modulator, you're going to increase GABA's affinity, but what if you don't have enough GABA around, right? So even things like kava and CBD and CBG and other, and even things like hanokiol or hanokiol from magnolia bark, these are all positive allosteric modulators. They're safer than alcohol and benzos for sure, but they're also going to potentially deplete GABA over time. So that, this is why we always think, you and I, as a company, we know that we try to do this combination, which is called an obligate pair, obli pair for short, where agrin binds directly where GABA would bind. And then you have something like hanokiol or hanokiol that binds the positive allosteric site. So combination is going to decrease your risk of tolerance, dependence, withdrawal by a dramatic amount because you're not depleting GABA along the way.
All right. So we talked a little bit about the obli pair. One of the things I do like about agrin is its half-life.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is why it's so supportive of things like sleep is that the half-life's 4 to 6 hours?
It's actually longer than that. It's actually about 6.5 hours, which is nice because that's what we can use it for sleep. Typically people will find that if you get at least 6 hours, hopefully 6.5 or more, you're not going to feel groggy when you wake up because you've got enough sleep, and that's agrin's half-life, just about.
And what I love about agrin personally is that if you're a type of person like myself who wakes up in the middle of the night, can't get back to sleep, and one of the reasons why you can't get back to sleep is, this thought generator just starts going.
Yep.
And, some of those 70,000 or 120,000 thoughts start going, and pretty soon it's 3 a.m. and you're up and you're just like, well, hell, I'll just start working.
That's what you do.
Yeah. But when you have the agrin on board, those thoughts actually are quieted.
Yeah, they're less. Yeah.
And it's sort of one of these self-reported effects that allows you to get back to sleep. And so when we take agrin in sort of our sleep stack, it allows us to get back to sleep pretty easily.
Yeah. And it's a great thing because it's very common for people to wake up and their mind to start racing. And I would venture to say that it's not 70,000 thoughts on average at that point. It's probably more like 120,000. I mean, for me, it's usually I wake up thinking about all the things that I forgot to do the day before or that I have to do the day after or the next day going on. And it's very difficult for you to calm down. When you're sleeping, during REM sleep, your rapid eye movement sleep, like you could be chasing lions, you could be flying planes, you could be doing all those crazy things, but you don't typically wake up because you have GABA around. So it's one of those things where it kind of helps regulate our sleep cycle. But we need GABA during the day as well. And that's why you can have like non-sedating formulas that we like Trocom, for example, that we have, which is, it makes you feel less anxious, but doesn't make you feel tired. And I think that's a nice combination for people too, during the day so they can take that edge off.
Yeah, that combination that we're talking about is that B3 GABA,
yeah.
Right? And so you're binding vitamin B3 with GABA, and that's really what keeps you somewhat awake, right?
Yeah, B3 is niacin, so that makes NAD in the brain. And so you get like a little bit of activation at the same time as you get the GABA going into the brain. So so Trocom has B3 GABA, kava, CBD, and CBG. So kava, CBD, CBG, those are all working on those positive allosteric sites on the GABA receptor. And then the serotonin system is more regulating mood as well. But that B3 GABA is the one that binds directly to the GABA receptor. It is a transporter to get B3 and GABA over. During the day, so many of us have forgotten what it feels like to be calm. And so I use it a lot in clinical practice to give people that experience of this is what it's supposed to feel. This is what you're supposed to feel like when you're calm. And then from there, you can do meditation, you can do breath work, you can do dietary changes, exercise, and you can feel what it felt like to get back to where you were, right? It's like, in meditation, we said there's no there. But from a parasympathetic activation perspective, there's definitely a there. So
yeah, one thing I want to just pause and spend a moment on is the idea of calm being a lever for focus, because in this health space, the stimulants are so sexy.
They are.
Everybody, it's so easy to get people to take stimulants because you feel up. But the idea of using calm as a force for focus is something that a lot of people don't think about, right? And I know you've spent a lot of time on the parasympathetic nervous system and that sort of death spiral. But here, you're taking something like a Trocalm or, B3 GABA, and it allows you to feel this relaxation, which also dims those thoughts, allows you to kind of lock in and get those flow states a lot easier.
Yeah.
It's something that people don't think about. Usually you go for something that is a dopamine agonist like nicotine, right? Or you go for something that is a stimulant like caffeine. But you can take a B3 GABA and get the same access to focus, if not better, that you would get with one of these kind of dopamine agonists.
Yeah. So a good example of this is for our podcast, the Smarter Harder podcast, I interviewed a guy named Jeremy Bloom. And Jeremy is an Olympic skier, and he was an NFL running back, I think.
Now he's CEO of the X Games, right?
Yeah, he is CEO of X Games now, and he actually lives in Boulder. And so when he first started doing all his events, like in his Olympic trials, he was listening to like Metallica. But by the time he got very skilled, he was actually listening to Mozart.
So I have a friend who does MMA, and his entrance song is Sade. Nice. And so it's one of those things where it also throws his opponent off, but allows him to stay calm the entire time.
Yes, and that calm part. So the problem is when we're so sympathetically driven, like we're so on, the frontal lobe gets less blood flow. And that's where our executive function is. That's where we can keep things in our mind, our memory, recall. Really, our focus is there. And so if we are hyperstimulated, it's the common nightmare. You go in front of everybody and you forget all your lines of the speech you're supposed to give or whatever, right? And so that's because your brain goes blank because you don't have enough blood flow going to that front part. So if you can calm down the nervous system just a little bit, even just like 10, 20%, you're going to start performing better because you get more blood flow to the parts of your brain that are required so you can do the things that you want to do and show up.
Very cool. Should we wrap this thing up?
I think we should.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of Don't Look Up. A couple things that we covered today that I think are very important. The first is the idea of this obligate pairing, or obli pair for short. The way I like to think about the obligate pair is you have a positive allosteric modulator and a GABA agonist, right? Rather than sticking purely on scientific terms, I like to think of the positive allosteric modulator as sort of a multiplier effect for whatever GABA that you have there. And the danger with things like benzodiazepines or alcohol or just taking kava by itself, for example, is that if you're not actually producing GABA, you're adding a multiplier effect to 0. And let's say, that 12 times 0 is still 0. So here, having that pairing of that GABA agonist, that positive allosteric modulator, tends to work very, very well, especially what we've seen in clinical practice. Yeah. What other things we summarize?
We talked about how you can decrease your inputs that are causing GABA deficiency, especially stress, toxins in your environment, toxic people, toxic relationships. If you have a need for a sleep divorce, go for a sleep divorce, right? These can be very helpful. And we also talked about some of the supplementation otherwise that you can think about as a baseline. So things like magnesium B6, which are conversions to glutamate to GABA. We also spoke about glutamine and leaky gut and leaky brain. And we talked about a lot.
So thank you for tuning in to another episode of Don't Look Up, where we encourage you to look up. If you're watching this on YouTube, please click like, leave a comment, hit subscribe. We look forward to hearing from you guys soon.